Carla, so now it's over with. There were some surprises. What happened that people had not expected?
That's right. Well, surprises is that something in politics happened. Change actually came. It did what it was supposed to do, which was to change the system, shake up the incumbents, shake up the jigsaw puzzle a little bit, and we actually saw that. We saw incumbents who got the message that they can no longer coast anymore. A few of them a little bit of a surprise when you talk about Pete Stark in the East Bay coming in just really ahead of an almost unknown challenger, Eric Swalwell. Pete Stark being in office 20 terms. In the Southern California, that huge race, Howard Berman versus Brad Sherman. Berman's been in office 4 decades. These guys faced one of the biggest challenges that this primary brought to them, totally redrawn lines in their districts. In many cases, these incumbents had to introduce themselves to whole new groups of voters, and so you had people really spending a lot of money to hold on to their seats, and they are not guaranteed going into November.
Well,
that they're
Carla said some surprises. Dan Walters, you have seen it all. Were you surprised by anything that happened there?
Well, yes and no. I mean, the system, as Carla said, did work the way it was supposed to. It did new lines, top 2 primary. You're going to have a lot of races in the fall in which Democrats are going to face Democrats like Berman and Sherman, and Republicans are going to be facing Republicans. That's a new wrinkle that we haven't seen before. And there were some surprises. For example, the Democrats couldn't even get a candidate on the ballot then. A district down in Southern California they thought they were going to win. So yeah, there were some little shake-up here and there. And remember, a lot of incumbent congressmen dropped out rather than even try to run for re-election this year.
And another aspect too, Dan, was the independents and how they came out in this. We know that independents are 1 out of 5 voters in this state. So a lot of people thought people like Chad Condit in the Central Valley or Nathan Fletcher, who was running for mayor in San Diego, would do well in that kind of atmosphere. No, independents really didn't have much of a showing. Both of those lost. And, I think that was a little bit of a surprise on the political front here.
You watched the numbers or read about them, if not covering them, on election night. What was new down in the Central Valley?
Well, an interesting race we were watching was, of course, between Ricky Gill, Republican, young Republican candidate, 21 years old, trying to unseat Jerry McNerney, the incumbent candidate, and it was a close race. There was a spread of about 3 or 4 points.
That was a fascinating race.
It's an interesting race. The Republican Party, I think, has thrown a lot of support behind Ricky Gill.
Yeah, this is a rising star, Ricky Gill, Indian American, very young. A lot of people say really he's never held
He's a little over
job.
21, though. His birthday was a couple of weeks ago.
He just turned 25, which makes him. He just graduated from college, I think, within the week. So
but going forward, I think that's going to be really one to watch in the Central Valley. We've really seen it that this time around. The redrawn lines, as Dan said, the party-on-party aspect of it. And there's some other aspects of this primary, too, we should mention. Dianne Feinstein, who was up against 23 opponents. A lot of people in the Republican Party were fearing that Orly Tates, who is a birther, who is way far to the right, was going to sort of embarrass the party and end up, she didn't. She's going to be up against Elizabeth Emken, who is from Danville. That's an interesting one. And then I think on the initiatives, Dan, I think that's something that you might
You're in
talk
the home
about
of the
too.
lobbyists up there. So how well did they do?
The tobacco initiative. Right. Was that a big surprise? I think the way it came out, 7-1, they were outspent.
Yeah, well, it wasn't a surprise at the end because it was obviously the pro side was going down. But I think it demonstrates, if nothing else, that taxes are tricky. There's a measure that started out with about 2/3 voter support and probably going to wind up losing. Yes, a lot of money was spent against it, but obviously the message was there about taxes. And so it's something to be watched in the fall because we're going to have a couple of tax measures on the ballot in the fall. And even though the electorate will be much larger in the fall and more diverse than this one, it indicates that a properly constructed opposition campaign that's well-financed can beat taxes at the polls.
Okay, so there should have been some celebrating by some in Sacramento over term limits, right?
Oh, yeah, the legislators love it, except remember, it doesn't affect those in office now. It only affects prospectively those in the future. And who will really impact, our Democratic legislative leaders will be able to stay in their leadership positions longer in the future, as maybe as many as 10 years or so. Those are the people who will really benefit from this.
Yeah, we're talking about Prop 28, which extends the time that you can stay in the legislature a dozen years versus staying in one house for a portion of that time and then moving over to the other.
That's right.
And so I guess that's going to solve the problem of the legislature becoming stronger than those who lobby them.
No, it won't. No, it won't.
Absolutely.
No, you know better than that, Bella.
Well, Dan, you too wrote some interesting things about the pension fight that's going on and what happened this election cycle with San Jose as well as with San Diego.
I think those were very, very interesting. Those are large cities. Those are the second and third largest city in California, and the vote for pension reform was overwhelming, like 2/3 in both those cities. And at least in the case of San Jose, that's a liberal Democratic city. That should be a wake-up call for the public employee unions that they cannot hold out indefinitely on pension reform. It should strengthen the hand of the governor, who's asking for pension reform and saying it's needed to convince voters to vote for new taxes. But clearly still, the legislative leadership and the Democratic majority in the legislature is very reluctant to go against the unions on this issue because, frankly, they owe the unions. They're completely dependent on the unions for campaign money, and the governor's dependent on them for money for his tax measures. So it makes for a very yeasty sort of situation.
And Dan, you know, the governor said this week, we talked to him on this issue, said that these two cities really were sort of a landmark, that more than Wisconsin, San Jose and San Diego, the vote there was something that the nation was watching. I mean, do you think that this is sort of a canary in the coal mine for the whole nation when it comes to, you mentioned very liberal cities, and these were huge votes, 2-1 in favor of pension reform, especially in a city like San Jose where they've seen libraries close and people get cut, firefighters and so forth.
Well,
I think it is big because if you notice, they got big attention by the national news media. I mean, New York Times and CNN and all these people, and NBC made it their lead item as the California election. This is big stuff. This is coupling with what happened in Wisconsin. This is a very big thing.
But both of you, these were promises made by officials to these workers that this was what they could give up part of a raise that they were looking for or whatever have you. They could exchange benefits if they would whether they could take less wages and and trade that for pension benefits.
Well, but there was a caveat in that. The caveat was at the time that all these improvements in pensions were made about 10 or 12 years ago. The stock market was booming. The pension funds were rolling in money, but they have since lost hundreds of billions of dollars in California, and now the taxpayers are on the hook for those promises.
Well, it's interesting now, do the unions get the message, Dan, that if they don't come up with some reforms here or offer some kind of compromise, that the voters will be the ones to act? That seemed to be the message in San Jose.
It certainly is the message, and the question is whether the legislature will actually take that seriously or whether they'll just do some kind of cosmetic, sort of superficial pension changes hoping that will make it all go away.
Well, what about the courts fights that is supposed to follow this?
Well, that's the question. Yeah. Under California law, these pension benefits are supposedly sacrosanct. But and this leads up to your situation in Stockton. There's a great fear among union leaders that if a city goes bankrupt, it might go to bankruptcy court, and federal bankruptcy law might supersede that pension benefits and actually order them to be cut. That's why the unions are pushing legislation in Sacramento to make it more difficult for cities to declare bankruptcy.
Well, the president was here
right.
on the same time.
Right.
And did he acknowledge anything about the results out of Wisconsin or San Diego
I think that was
or San Jose?
Yeah, that was the very interesting thing, Belva, about being there in the fundraiser with him in San Francisco. A lot of the donors I talked to there said, hey, we're very interested to hear what he has to say. The fact is, this is a very difficult thing for him to walk. He didn't participate in Wisconsin. He didn't even mention it, frankly, and I think that was a little bit of a surprise to folks. At the same time, politically, as Dan said, this is a very delicate issue, even for the governor, going forward. He said it was imperative, but now we have to see what he's going to do and how much he's going to demand from the union. So at this point, no. we haven't heard much from Obama on Wisconsin or what happened here in California.
Well, back to pensions again, because I think that played a role in what happened in Stockton, didn't it? With Stockton not having the money to keep the city running properly because they have put so much money into future planning on pensions. And
That is certainly one of the stressors going on right now. Sort of the big story in Stockton this week was that the city council agreed to give the city manager the authority to file for bankruptcy protection, which sort of the underlying theme here is that Stockton will be, if that comes to pass, the largest city in the nation to file for bankruptcy after Vallejo, which just emerged from that. So certainly that's happened. What's going on is the city is still in mediation. They're trying to work out new deals with the creditors, with the retirees, with the labor groups, and the deadline for that is June 25th. So we're just really a couple of weeks away. And the city has laid out their plan, their timeline. They say if we can't make a deal in this confidential mediation by June 25th, the next day, you might have a bankruptcy filing from Stockton.
And what, just technically, the average citizen in Stockton, what is it going to mean to them? How are they going to see changes? Is it going to be immediately apparent? What happens?
That's the big fear now is, what happens to me? Will the grass get cut in the parks? Will there be police officers? And the city says yes. If that happens, we're going to continue doing business as usual. People will not necessarily know that the city's in bankruptcy. That's the idea. They're trying to send the message that what they're trying to do now in mediation and bankruptcy is go after, say, the bondholders that Stockton over leveraged itself for these capital projects, the arena, the ballpark, and not go after, again, public employee pay. So they're not going to go after that with the hopes that Stockton firefighters and police officers don't leave en masse.
Let me offer a little sidelight to that whole thing. I followed that Stockton situation. I think the key here thing is the bankers who hold those bonds. There's a sense around the thing that those bankers are going to be very tough, that they really don't want to take a haircut because the banking industry in general could see a wave of these kind of municipal bond bankruptcies that would absolutely destroy the municipal bond market if they have to give up some of that money. And so I have a hunch that these bankers are going to really hang tough on this. As we know, Wells Fargo is already trying to reclaim some of the property it has mortgages on. I think my sense of the thing is that this is probably going to wind up, in fact, in bankruptcy court.
But we're talking about bankers and housing here. Weren't they also quite a hunk of what the problems are with Stockton?
Yeah, they allowed Stockton to issue bonds, and in some cases it was backed by the general fund for Stockton, which really puts Stockton at risk of ending up in some serious problems. Stockton can't pay its bills. The general fund, which pays for police and fire, is on the hook for that. So that's the big fear.
And what about the foreclosure rate or the building rate? That was one of the things that encouraged Stockton to build these arenas. And
yeah, certainly in the boom years, not too long ago. In fact, I think the numbers are in the peak year, Stockton issued 3,000 building permits for new homes. A lot of people from the Bay Area were coming over to Stockton for a piece of the American dream, and I think the number is now something like 125. So that really gives you a picture of the numbers and what's underpinning the problem. People are losing their homes now. They don't have jobs. The city's not reaping property taxes and sales taxes.
But you also can't let those politicians off the hook. They're the ones who mortgaged Stockton's future for these grandiose projects in downtown Stockton. And there's an old saying: if it's too good to be true, it probably is. And they thought this boom was going to go on forever, and they were not very smart about it.
Dan, are there other cities in California where we're looking at the same kind of scenario?
Yeah, that we are looking at. In fact, there's another city already in the same straits as Stockton, a much smaller city of Mammoth Lakes, and they're even using the bankruptcy, the B word, in Los Angeles, the state's largest city. They've talked about it in San Diego because of some of their pension problems. Look, this is a wildfire. If the economy doesn't rebound sharply soon, and these pension costs keep building up, and these bondholders start putting on the pressure, you're going to see a lot of cities flirting, at least, with bankruptcy in California in the next few years.
And some big cities to boot.